All right, we're live. So welcome aboard, everybody. It's good to see you. It's good to see Ben back. Ron, Josh, Nick, Ruth, Roberta, and Tassie. We're going to be looking at Ephesians 4. So yeah, speaking of those videos you mentioned a second ago, Ruth, that was I don't know what it is, but I feel like there's something flowing, like there's something, like I feel like I can just put content out for some reason right now. I don't always feel like that. And I don't know who all saw this, but there was in one of the dragon videos, the idea that an insight happened to me while I was talking, and that is the comparison of the woke ideology being like a secular religion, and the fact that identifies Calvinism as its own separate religion. It has its own distinctive, independent religious qualities separate from Christianity, which are camouflaged by the fact that it has nested itself within Christianity. It never occurred to me before until it came out while I was talking. I'm like, wow, that's right. That sounds right. But I'd never thought about that before. It just came out of my mouth. And I don't know if it kind of felt like a flow state thing to happen. Say hi to some people in the chat here. All right, are we ready to talk about Ephesians chapter 4? Did anybody do any so I'll tell you, I'll start talking a little bit. When you guys want to jump in, let me know that you want to jump in. I'll start talking a little bit and show you some things that kind of jump out to me somewhat. For those who don't know, this is kind of a new discussion series where we're starting to talk about Ephesians 4 and 5, and this is the first of these episodes. This is 001 of the Ephesians series, and then we're just discussing it. When in Ephesians 4:1, the word therefore shows up, and that obviously means that you have to see what's the word therefore something comes before that. We're not, by starting in Ephesians 4:1, we're not saying that the previous part of Ephesians isn't important, but nothing could be further from the truth. Obviously it's important, and I'm sure some Calvinists out there will be an opportunist and jump on the idea that we're trying to skip chapter 1 verse 4 and 5, that kind of thing. Or chapter 2 verses 1 through 4. That's not the case at all. We have videos on all that stuff, and we're not against going back and looking at those. But the reason chapter 4 is interesting is because when Paul writes, it's kind of he kind of writes dichotomously, where he splits between theoretical and practical. And then in chapter 4 verse 1, he starts getting practical. In Romans, it happens in chapter 12, where you have all this basically theory, if you will, and then the practical stuff, like practical instructions. So there's the issue of he starts saying, now because of all this stuff we've covered, it should affect the way you walk. It should affect your behavior. And I want to point a couple things out that stand out to me, and I'm going to be pointing out a bunch of other things, Lord willing, but one of them is according to the power that worketh in us, right? I am upset. I don't know about upset, but I am stricken by the idea when I observe Christians in public, and I go to churches in this area. I'm not going to say which ones right now. We did a video on one of them, and I'm stricken by the separateness, by how separate people perceive that they are from God, like how other entity they perceive God to be. Even Christians, but when I look in Scripture, I see that God is this thing that is in and through us. There's a component to it that is in and through us. and there's a motion. It's like you find out how God is moving and flowing in a particular environment, and you find out how to become part of that. A good picture of that would be in Ephesians 5:18, where Paul says, "Be not drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit." I've been told that language there is the same kind of language that would be used for a sail on a sailboat, to be filled with wind. Okay, so the Spirit moveth whithersoever the whithersoever it listeth. The Spirit is like wind; it moveth whithersoever it listeth. So that I'm distracted right now because I forgot to send my mother the link to this. She always likes to watch, but the idea of that extension. Okay, so when you look at embodied cognition, there is a degree to which the tools that you have in your mind are perceived as extensions of yourself. For example, if I take a pair of scissors and I start using a pair of scissors and I'm, say, wrapping Christmas presents or whatever, that my body starts to see this tool as an extension of my hand. It starts to be seen as part of who I am. Your car, when you drive your car, starts to be seen as an extension of who you are. And I think that in this way, when you become attuned with God and realize that He is working through you, and you should be something like a sail where you are filled with Him, and that is what gives you the power to do what you do, that you and God see each other as extensions of the self, rather than as some separate foreign entity. In verse 6, I know I'm not sure. I'm not even sharing my screen here. I'll share this real quick so you can see what I'm looking at. Back in chapter 3, there is this, according to the power that worketh in us. That's what happens in chapter 3. Now unto Him that is able to exceedingly abundant, able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us, like wind in a sail. It's an extension of embodiment. Unto Him be glory in the church by Christ Jesus throughout all ages, without world. Amen. Without end. Amen. World without end. Verse 6 of chapter 4, this phrase here, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body, one Spirit, even as you are called, one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and in all and through all and in you all. Now, to me, what sticks out to me when I read that is it reminds me of something that Einstein said when he said it's an illusion to believe that there are separate things. There is one universe, and we're all part of it. And God is not He is an extension of our embodiment if we are Christians. And when we move, when we walk, when we behave, it is in the flow of God, if you will, in the movement of it. You move, you learn how God is moving, and like a sailboat, you move with it. All right.
I kind of want to pick up on this.
Yes.
So I dare say this all sounds like sort of, I'll just say this, it's very convergent with sort of a Neoplatonic way of seeing things. I'm not saying it's not originating there. I'm not saying that's what Paul is getting at. I'm just saying there's a lot of convergence.
There's a little, you got the fuzz going again, the distortion a little bit.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I wanted to pick up on two things. Number one, I get the sense when Paul is writing that he's a very dialogical writer. So he'll put in order for him to explain or express himself, what he's trying to get across, I feel like he sets up dichotomies. So the fruits of the Spirit, the works of the flesh, Galatians 5, Romans 5, life, death, 2 Corinthians 5, light, dark, So he sets up a lot of these dichotomies in order to express the meaning or the thing that he's trying to get across to you. And then in this portion of Ephesians 4 that you're getting at, where it's one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one. It's kind of nice because there's this sense that you get, and you're kind of trying to, it sounds like you're trying to tie this into how we are in this unity with God, as being in Christ and all of this, and that there's not this otherness and separateness. But the thing is that it's like, in order for that oneness to be expressed, there has to be a unity, not just of unity, but a unity in division. So there's unity in the fact that things are different, if that makes any sense, or anybody's tracking on that. So
Can you go into that a little bit more? I mean, the thing that pops into my head is like the unity of a body, where
yeah,
not everything in your body is the same. Not all the cells do the same thing, but they are one body.
yeah. So that's where I'm saying that the Neoplatonic convergence is that all is one, right? But it's that all is one all is unified in its differences. All is unified and expressed and individualized and valued, because there's value distinction between things. So
And the value
that's
distinction might be based on purpose rather than intrinsic.
it might be based on function rather than just intrinsic, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like one it's not like one person is intrinsically more valuable than another person, but they might be more suited for a particular goal. And if you're trying to accomplish that goal, your values would cause you to choose them because you're optimizing for that goal. Just like you would do with, say, the different shoes in your closet. If I'm going to go out to mow the yard, I'm going to pick a different pair of shoes than if I'm going to go meet the banker.
And I'd like to pick up on that. The scripture you showed about Jesus' prayer that people would be one, the believers, or the apostles, the disciples. Well, anyway, I think of the scripture that uses the analogy of the parts of the body, like you mentioned, Kevin.
Yeah, 1 Corinthians 12 for sure.
So, although there is a oneness, there is a difference, and it's a complementarity. I was thinking along the same lines of maybe something more mechanical, like gears that work in a transmission.
Yeah.
They're different gears, but they all have to work together for the transmission to work. Complementary.
Yeah, somebody said in the comments, unity, not uniformity. That's a good comment. Were you still finishing a thought, Nick? Did you have more to add on to that?
No, I just wanted to again riff off of the two things that I think that when you're reading Paul, he seems to use dichotomy or antithetical principles in order to convey the meaning of what he's trying to say. I just sense that more from him than I do from, say, John or some of the gospel writers or some of the Old Testament writers. And then tying that dialogical unity in division into sort of how you're expressing yourself and in relation to your participatory experience with God.
Yeah. yeah, the unity and division with God. If God is working through you, there has to be a you for him to work through. So you are not God and he is not you, but there is a sense of unity there where there, for the sake of purposes, there are times where one is the extension of the other. When Jesus is praying, he says, and for their sakes, I sanctify. He's talking about the ones who were given. All right. Verse 12. While I was with them in the world, the ones that thou gavest me. He's obviously, verse 6, he's talking about the ones that are given to him. They are the ones that he was with when he was in the world. They are the apostles. I have not chosen you, but you have not chosen me, but I have chosen you. John 15:6 he's speaking to the apostles there. Well, when he finishes praying for the apostles, he says, neither pray I for these alone, but for them also which shall believe on me through their word. Okay, so those are the ones coming after the apostles, different set than the given, that they all may be one, as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that thou hast sent me. So there's a reason for it. World may believe that thou hast sent me. And I can't help but think of practically the one aspect of it being the whole body working together in a distributed cognition, like we see in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 16. So I will hit that, and then I don't know how much of my notes will be helpful, but these little yellow dots over here are notes that I have. So one thing I want to do to kind of kick off some discussion with the group is read the verse, and then I'll share my thoughts as kind of an introduction and an invitation for anybody else to also share their thoughts on it, if that's all right with y'all. Chapter 4, verse 1, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, and these are called the prison epistles because he is actually in jail when he writes this, and he doesn't see himself as a prisoner of Rome. He sees himself as a prisoner of the Lord. In other words, he wouldn't be in jail if God didn't want him there for some reason. I beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith ye are called. Now, this is so dense here because if you're called with a heavenly calling, practically you're not going to be able to walk worthy of it. But we have this admonition anyway. There is a vocational call once a person is saved. I find two calls in Scripture. You have the call of the gospel, which is in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 14, called by our gospel. And then you have a vocational calling for those who are saved. Like I think it's 2 Timothy 1:9, who saved us and called us, not according to our works, but according to that kind of thing. So in other words, once you get saved, there is something you should be doing. There's a vocation that you should be doing, and it's described as a walk. And a walk is a means of conveyance. People will say, they'll just reduce it to, well, the walk that's just your behavior. It's just a Christian behavior. Well, that's not untrue. But if I were to say, you need to drive worthy of the vocation wherewith you are called, it's a means of conveyance. It's a means of going somewhere. And it should beg the question, if you're going somewhere, where are you going? That brings up in Philippians chapter 3, verse 14, Paul is going somewhere. He's pressing toward a mark. And what I try to impress on people is that you have an imaginal sacred second self, the version of yourself that is more like Christ. Pick a time period, 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future, and you get an image of what that is. And then you aim for it and you go in that direction. There's movement. You have to move. And you also, as you grow and as you move, you realize that the picture that you had of where you should be in 5 years was not right. for whatever reason. And you need to calibrate that, and you need to refine that and change what that looks like. If you keep doing that, somebody said you need to work on your try to accomplish your 10-year goal in 6 months. And yeah, you might not reach your 10-year goal, but you'll be in 6 months, you'll be a lot further along than you were than if you hadn't tried and weren't aiming at something. So aim at something and move very deliberately toward it and calibrate what you're aiming at. Reshape what that picture looks like on a regular basis. Describe it, write it down. You're walking towards something. I'm going to read my comment and then I'm going to shut my mouth. Maybe I'm not going to read my comment. Okay. I wrote this. I don't know why it doesn't want to show this comment that I have here. But I'm going to have to read it from elsewhere because it's not showing up there. But the comment says, move with a purpose in a goal-oriented fashion toward the desired end state of all members participating in a non-egoic collaborative effort that achieves the knowledge and awareness Paul mentioned in the previous chapter. So if you're like, hey, where am I headed because I'm walking? Well, Paul gives some clear instructions. He's like, I want you to be strengthened. I want you to comprehend something. And there's 4 dimensions to the comprehension. And then there is an agapic element here. A lot of people think that this comprehending is to comprehend the breadth, length, depth, and height of the love of God, but that's not what the text says. It's and to know separate things, which passeth knowledge that you might be filled with all the fullness of God. So what does that look like? What does it look like to be filled with all the fullness of God? Well, you picture that as best you can, and you aim for it. All right. So I'm going to pause there to see if other folks have comments at this point.
Kevin, can I ask a question? A clarification question about the calling thing?
Yeah.
So in your view, is it, do you feel that the calling that is given it, like you said, heavenly calling, like a ministerial calling, is it basically suggesting that once we are saved, God kind of has a mission for us, for each of us individually on this earth to do something, to fulfill something, and that although I don't mean that ministerially, like, oh, we need to become pastors, we need to enter into the clergy or any of that stuff. Just this is like our ministerial mission, and that is what we need to sort of like orient our life around. Is that kind of how you view that? Am I regurgitating that back to you in terms you would agree with?
It sounds a little game A to me.
What does that mean?
I don't know if I'm articulate enough to distinguish what you're saying from what I'm thinking. I know that it does not match exactly.
Okay.
It's not exactly wrong, but if all of Christianity, or let's take it to a smaller scale. If a local body of Christianity is engaging in the edification process as Paul is about to describe, the body will have an impact on the surrounding world. And each individual's vocational calling is to participate in that process, in love, speaking the truth in love. If you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith you are called, there are very specific things that are going to happen. You're going to speak the truth in love. You're not going to be naive. There's certain things that need to happen. And as you are edified by the group, and as you are pressing toward a mark, your individual aim will be refined over time. And there's that age-old question, what's the will of God for my life? Well, it's laid out right here. in chapter 4. When you think of the heavenly calling in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 1, he says, "Wherefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling." It's like there is a heavenly calling. There is a vocational calling that we should all be doing. Now, it doesn't mean we're all going to be doing the exact same thing. We're going to be participating in different ways. And it's, far be it from any human to dictate to another one exactly what that should be. But I think that a lot of people think of this individualistically, and a lot of people, and I want people to think of it more collectively and go back and forth, individual to collective, because you can't have a community without individuals, and you can't have individuals if there's not a community against which to contrast it, so you know what an individual is. So there is a will of God for the community of believers that cannot be separated from the will of God from each individual in it. But there is a togetherness there that I'm not articulating very well, that I feel. But with regard to the word calling, I want to get away from, a lot of people think Calvinistically and they don't realize it. They think of an inward call and an outward call. That's not scriptural. Or they think of an effectual call and an ineffectual call. Nothing in scripture about that. One of the things I want to do, and I might have done it wrong, but one of the things that I want to do is, if we're going to use the word calling, let's look at how scripture uses it and not add these other things to it. I do see two kinds of calling. I see a gospel call. I see a vocational call. And maybe you could say that they're one and the same, but I think the vocational call is it's a thing that's always there. It's part of the logos. And when you put up your sail and get in the flow of God, you will sail as you ought. I'm going to stop talking now.
Can I make a comment?
Yes,
maybe way off base here, but this almost sounds like Paul is starting out letting people know that they have a really tough accountability. And then he kind of goes into an admonishment. Make sure that whatever you do, you are worthy and you're walking worthy in that calling that God has called you to do. Because there's only one body, there's only one faith, there's only one spirit. It's almost like you better make sure whatever you're doing with integrity, because you're all in this together. There is no we and you, it's us together. And if you're not doing your job, then the whole body suffers. And that may not be at all what he's saying here, but that's kind of how I was reading it.
Yeah, that sounds exactly right to me. That sounds exactly right, especially when you look at Romans 12 and 1 Corinthians 12.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
really appreciate that from Roberta. I think, just to sort of riff off of what she was getting at, I don't really see a need to make distinctions about calls in scripture. I think more along the lines of what Roberta said. I think whenever the word call comes up, it's sort of just a provocation towards responsibility. So the inductive question has to come up, called to what? So I don't necessarily know that there's a need to have a hard line. Okay, well, there's a calling for this and there's a calling for this.
Yeah, you don't want to have a doctrine about calling and import
Right.
that every time you see the word calling.
Right. So every time that you do see it, though, you could ask called to what? And most of the time, probably if not all the time, it's called to some sort of response ability.
Yeah.
Technically. Right. And that's why I
Oh, and-
appreciated Roberta's words.
And he kind of ends it with, hey, in let's see, verse 7, you're without excuse here, because he's given grace to everyone according to the gift that he's given you. So whatever you're called to do, don't say you can't do it because God's given you the grace to do it.
It sounds like a parent.
You think?
I like it.
So the reason I asked that question, Roberta, Roberta and Nick, your comments are really kind of in line with what I was thinking, because it's something that's just I've been dealing with and wrestling with the last couple of weeks is, I'm looking at the church and I'm looking at scripture and trying to wrestle with how do we in America today, I'm in Georgia, right, do the express Ephesians 4, right, the Ephesians 4 model, the edification model, and speaking the truth. Like, how do we do that in the unique culture that we're in, where, I mean, isn't Ruth, are you guys in Canada or something? I mean, like, we're all over the continent, let alone the globe, participating in these calls. But then how do we also be the church at the same time? And the place I've been really stuck at is because we've been attending a local body, an existing local body. And although they do exegetical teaching, which we really appreciate, and they have, small groups, which is better than nothing. It's like that whole, okay, so we're spending, 2 to 4 hours together a week, and that's supposed to be church. Like, that's supposed to be the church in the community. Like, how are we supposed to be transforming the community and bringing about this change both within ourselves and just by exuding our presence, but exuding God's presence in us, in our community, if that's all we're doing? And I kind of came to a place where I thought, okay, I think what I'm being called to do, like, and pardon the use of that word, but for all the reasons we just talked about, but it's like the thing that I guess I would say the thing that I feel most passionate about is doing neighborhood, like, walking distance ministry, but in a suburban context, right? Not in, this isn't like We Are Church that Francis Chan is doing in San Francisco, which is a very urban context, but it's like, okay, how do you do something similar to that, where you're working with people that are very nearby you, not 20 minutes away, 20 miles away, or 2,000 miles away, but how do you do it with people that are 2 minutes away by foot? And that's almost more terrifying, right? Because now you have to just deal with the people you have. You can't just go switch groups of people. So all this is to say that I just never felt comfortable. I've always been trying to find either an existing church body, local church body, that is trying to do the thing that I'm interested in doing, and none of them want to do it.
I like the way that's worded, by the way. That's trying to do the thing I'm trying to do. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's the idea. Is like, whatever they're trying to do, their process, their goal is not my goal. Now there's an overlap, and there is the sense of, my family benefits from all of us going to a worship service together and singing the music, and the kids interacting with other kids and doing all of that. So there's a benefit to it. There's an overlap in the general, kind of like what you're saying, like the general direction. We all kind of have the salvific, heavenly calling towards just growing in Christ, but the specifics of how that is played out, I think is unique to each individual, or maybe each family or something, of how that is maybe expressed, right? Like, you can have a radio signal that goes across the whole world, but depending on the equipment that you have and how well you're tuned into it, it'll affect the sound and how that will come out. So it might sound different on a tinny 100-year-old radio from World War I versus, a ghetto blaster from the 80s versus, some movie studio stuff that they have now. So it's just like, that was like my personal experience, intersecting with what you're talking about here, where this vocation and this calling might be something that, yes, it's a group calling versus 4 through, 1 through whatever. This is all ye and you. This is to the group. Paul's talking to the group in general. But then at the same time, with this unity, there's also these expressions, these individual expressions of how are we going to go live that thing out. And I think I'm starting to make peace with, I'm never going to fit with those people and doing that sort of thing. Like, I can go hang out with them. I can be friends with them. I can develop a relationship with them, but their mission is totally different than what I think my mission is, or how they're expressing God in them is through this very formulaic, traditional, set in its sort of legacy kind of feel. And I might be trying to do something that no one has really formulated before. So it's kind of out there and weird, and it's never been codified, and it's scary, but cool.
It brings up the same question that has been asked on this channel multiple times, like in this session. And I remember Roberta asking it months ago. It's like, what should we be doing? And when you hang out with the typical Christian, like the background from which I came from, it's almost like the only thing we have to offer is to persuade people of the things that we think are true. That's really all we have to offer. And maybe build a school and feed them a soup line or something, and be benevolent somewhere in the meantime. But other organizations do that too. But what is unique that we have to offer the world? In what way are people's lives better after having interacted with us? And like you're saying, Ben, when you look, what is that practical expression of action that the Christians should be doing in order to participate in this body thing? That's a really good question. And I feel like I'm getting at the point where I'm starting to sense it and feel it. And I've heard it manifest itself in a few conversations that I've had with otherwise secular people, which is amazing. But I don't think that I could capture it in a set of propositions. I think that, and I don't want people to confuse this with the concept of the emergent church, because that's exactly not what I'm talking about. But I do think that when you keep doing the edification model, that something appropriate for then and there will emerge from it. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but it's coming soon to a city near you. Yes.
You mentioned in one of your last videos, and I wrote down the line, you said an ideology is the art of persuading people to optimize for irrelevant metrics. And that just resonated, I think in just the pattern of church, I think I've been optimizing for irrelevant metrics, not knowing there were metrics that I was optimizing for. And I remember even saying, Dave and I would say to each other, okay, here we are, we're going to church again Sunday night. Our neighbors are all going to hell, but we're going to go and sit in church and we're going to hear whatever ministry because it's what we do.
Yeah.
Well, I think, you know what about irrelevant metrics? But I'm not sure what that looks like now to be relevant.
I think that the context of that comment came from things that make people feel more righteous while being ineffective.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this while I'm thinking this, I see this happening. I don't know so much tonight because I haven't really been looking at the chat tonight, but I noticed that it was happening in the chat in one of the Dragon of Calvinism videos, that the people who were against Calvinism were using moralistic language against Calvinists. And I'm guilty of that. And whether or not something is more or less man-centered or whatever kind of moral metric somebody wants to use does not have any bearing on how epistemically warranted it is or isn't, because that stands independent of the values. And that brings up something Nick said, which was really profound. I think a lot of people miss how to talk about truth. You cannot really talk about truth if you're not talking about values, because you have to value correspondence with reality. And that has to be valuable to you. Whereas in-group normalization to an approved opinion, proxying as truth, is what most Christians are promoting. So it's impossible. So the irrelevant metrics would have to be irrelevant because of what? And like, what's the purpose of life? Well, what's the purpose of your life? It depends on what you're trying to do. And then your actions have purposes depending on what you're trying to do, because you're doing, being, and becoming. And as you do the thing, you become the thing. So this feeling righteous while being ineffective depends on how you define what effective means. And I don't think that persuading people of what we think is true is effective. So ideology is the art of persuading people to optimize for irrelevant metrics. And a lot of Christians that I know, it's important that you know where you're going when you die and that you believe certain things. Well, there's a lot of life between the time when you come to believe those things and the time when you die. What are you doing with that? That's what we are failing to capitalize on as Christians in general.
Kevin, I want to point out some comments that I'm just looking at the YouTube chat right here. So Sanji Vinsmoke said, the churches I know are trapped in a fixed mindset of how churches are to be run. And then JD right after that said the book of James provides some practicalities on living this faith out ? And then later said, or that was somebody else, Arnold Roman, Kevin, you're talking about the organic church or what's called, I think it was meant to be, or what's called the house churches. And Arnold Roman said, and you've left the institutional system, you can't go back, which is definitely what I feel like. So it's just funny hearing that, like what you're saying, like what happens between when you believe the thing and when you get there. And you have passages like in James where they say, if you see a brother in need and you don't do anything, if you've been given the good of the world and you don't do anything, then, it's like your faith is worthless. Like it's just this empty thing. And I just wonder, what if the church was something that was so attractive, not just because it built schools and cured cancer, but was a place where people didn't have needs, or like they had needs, but they were so well met that like people wanted to not only just be around Christians, but they actually wanted to join the church because it was like practically useful for their life. Like things will be easier in your life because now you have this family, this community that looks out for you and takes care of you. And I don't really know of any churches that do that to that degree. I mean, they've got these, they've got benevolence funds for, maybe paying rent or, part of your electrical bill or something, but it goes back to but they're also spending 80% of their budget on electricity in the parking lot and repaving and painting the parking lot, so that's where I'm very much I don't want to engage with that system. And I feel like, I'll visit the system because man, they can put on a good concert and it's great to go to a Christian concert on a weekly basis, right? Like it's just awesome to be able to go to a really cool Christian concert every week, but I don't want to be part of that system. Like, I don't want to be engaged with it and giving it my time when I have limited time and energy and focus, and I want that intentionality to be focused on the thing that I think God is vocationaling me to. I'm going to vocationing me to
money and time. Yeah. Like I have a difficult time giving my money to some places because of how it's being used. I really struggle with that.
Could I respond to Ben?
Yeah.
Sort of, I just wanted to respond to his first comment and maybe just almost try and regurgitate, but something that I felt like was sort of, he was backgrounding, not in a good way to to sort of enhance the picture he was painting. So I saw three little steps that he, in sort of the story he was telling us of his own experience. I think that the three steps in that story are actually directly convergent with the steps that I see Paul take in Ephesians 4, which may or may not be there, but those steps are, I see sort of
what are the three steps that, as Ben said them?
Yeah. Okay. So it was the disintegration of basically church structures or hierarchical social structures. Then
and I would add to that the disintegration of their relevance too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I saw that, and then a redistribution of the contents or the information ecology, and then it's what to do on an individual level now that those social structures have disintegrated. And what I see in Ephesians 4 is that disintegration, and not in a bad way. It's in this, it almost seems like Paul is saying it in an inevitable way and a necessary way, where to some, what's the verse?
Verse 11.
11, yeah, he gave some apostles, prophet, right? All of these hierarchical structures. And then verse 13, the disintegration till we all come to the unity of the faith.
Until something happens.
Right.
So it's like these hierarchical structures are serving as a proxy for being connected to reality.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden, when that proxy is gone, you're awakened to the idea that that was never reality in the first place. I was just so naive and immature that I didn't know any different. And then when you come to the place where you see that it's not the thing, now it's time to transition.
Right. And so that's the second movement is some kind of redistribution into a different information ecology. And then the third step, which I think is what a lot of us are struggling with, is it's down actually in like verses 20, is that I think Paul starts addressing, he gives the edification model in verse 16, but he starts addressing the functionality, how this ought to be functioning structurally in an individual by the renewing of the mind and the putting off of the former conversation, the old man, which is corrupt, and being renewed in the spirit of your mind, linking it to Romans 12:2, and putting on the new man. And so I think he starts addressing
There's
the
another
individual.
dichotomy like you were talking about before.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think he starts addressing the individual. And this is where I want to tie something in that I'm going to get hung for, but that's okay. So
I got my pitchfork ready.
Yeah, we'll burn you at the stake.
Let's do it. So when you read Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, a lot of Christians have this whole little thing like, oh, God is dead, blah, blah, blah. He's this jerk philosopher who's, nihilistic. But what he's trying to do is he's trying to express to you what he sees in his modern late 19th century society is the disintegration of a Christian's ability to act virtuously, and that these social structures that disintegrate away, these hierarchies that disintegrate away in Paul's rendering in Ephesians 4, they leave you with the responsibility to having to cultivate your own values, your own virtue as an individual. And this,
like, you can't outsource your values to an organization. You now have to know what your values are.
Or your life.
You're not the Ubermensch. You're not the Ubermensch if you're just a succubus on the social structures.
All right, let's define that. Ubermensch, is that like a Superman?
Yeah, it's Christ for him. It's Christ. It's the ideal man. It's the new man in Ephesians 4.
And then the thing you said right after that.
You can't.
The Uberman is the
succubus.
Yeah, you can't fulfill the fullness of the stature of Christ if you're a succubus to and outsourcing your values, and because it it structures and strips away your ability to act out of individualistic virtue. But what I wanted to get at is that this is actually what he wants to say is going beyond good and evil. It's beyond the morality of the law, the structure of the law's hold on you, where it's black and white, where beyond good and evil is the Sophia and phronesis of being able to act in a virtuous and wise way out of the inner workings of your own my language is fit.
So
Mhm.
Sophia would be the theoretical wisdom, and phronesis would be the decisive acting out of wisdom. Yeah,
Yes,
I'm
right.
submitting that as a question to make sure I'm tracking,
Yes,
because
right.
there's a
And
lot
so-
of people who these words are just 50-cent words to a lot of people, and they
Yeah.
are in my vocabulary list on my phone.
Sorry. Yeah. So maybe got thanks for bringing me back down. So all I'm getting at is I just wanted to respond and sort of regurgitate sort of what I saw Ben's story backgrounding, in that it was backgrounding these three steps. And those 3 steps I'm also seeing are the exact movements that Paul is making in Ephesians 4, and that we might be in a space of sort of residual uncomfortability about the fact that the social structures of churching are disintegrated for us. And it's like, what do we do? I still feel like I need to be doing something. And it's like, no, you don't need to be doing something in the old man, the former conversation. Put off the former conversation, the old man, which is corrupt in the deceitful lusts and blah, 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 and put on the new man. He's speaking about individuals here after he's given the edification model.
So when you reference Nietzsche, when he made his comment, God is dead, a lot of people take that out of context and they think he's making a proclamation, but he's actually lamenting a very terrible thing, because he says God is dead and we will never be able to wash away the blood. And it was a prediction of when a society advances to the point that it thinks that it doesn't need God. Look at what, in which 1800s, you have Darwin come up, Charles Lyell, Darwin, Huxley, and these guys. And then in the 1900s, what do we see? We see a bunch of godless dictators killing millions of people. And he was absolutely right. You use Darwin to kill God, and then you get Stalin and Hitler and Mao.
Yeah.
And so on the church side, you have, when the institutional structure that is kind of serving to regulate everyone's behavior, when the emperor is no longer, emperor's new clothes get exposed for what they are, you suddenly realize that now you must it tests the genuineness of the individual's Christianity. Are you really getting guidance from God, from the Bible, and from the Holy Spirit, or were you just following men and institutions this whole time? And it's like something that separates the men from the boys, separates the wheat from the chaff, where not to exclude women on that statement there, but it's a separating mechanism that kind of reveals, you rip the Band-Aid off and it reveals what's really going on underneath. Who are the real ones that are really in touch with God and trying to stick to the stuff, and who are the ones that were following an institution as a proxy for God, not knowing the difference, which is still happening a lot. Joe, you're chomping at the bit to say something.
Oh, yeah. Well, when you mentioned Darwinism, and then all of the millions of people, who died at the hands of Nazism or communism, it's interesting that the Nazis used Darwinian theory to justify what they were doing, because to them,
Oh yeah, exactly.
the Jews were less evolved than the Germans. And
What's it called when you take somebody else's idea and you use it in a way that was not intended? Co-opt. The Nazis co-opted both Christianity and Nietzsche out of what those things are trying to be. And basically when you have, I mean, all the people who are, not all of them, but the German soldiers, the American soldiers were going into war with New Testaments from the Gideons in their uniforms and stuff. And the German soldiers were going to war with Thus Saith Zarathustra, copies of that. And yeah, Nietzsche was not trying to make a religion, but Hitler was co-opting things because of their usefulness. And, you know, studying, and this is an age-old debate, but he was essentially using Catholicism until it was no longer useful. And then he was going to dispense with it as well. People will say, oh, you know, he was a Christian. Look, he was a Catholic. No, he was, you know, you gotta fight one battle at a time. You know, and there were also lots of other undesirables on his list of people to kill other than the Jews. That's just the first ones he got to. And there were more coming. So there was a big, broader scheme. But yeah, absolutely. They were jumping on this evolutionary doctrine that we can speed evolution along if we just go ahead and kill off the people that shouldn't be surviving anyway, because they're not fit for the Third Reich. Anyway, I'm stealing your thunder.
Oh, well, and to pull some other thoughts together, if God is irrelevant, not necessarily dead, but irrelevant for us, then I see what we were talking about, like, what are we to do? And if you expand that to what's anybody to do, any human being, what am I here for? What's the purpose of my life? What's the meaning of life? Without God, and, you know, without God, then what are we? We're a bunch of chemicals. We're an accident when lightning hit an organic soup, you know, and there is no meaning. If you, in a sense, and I think so, God actually can provide meaning, you know. I'm finished.
One thing that popped in my head while you were saying that, Joe, is that it's the mental image of God that people have constructed in their minds is not the real one, and it's irrelevant.
Well, that's true too.
Yeah, so can I just chime in really quick, just because I saw some comments in the chat? I think Joe and Kevin, thanks for like tightening up the screws on that a little bit. My only point was, maybe I shouldn't have brought it up, but my only point was just to sort of highlight how Ben's story in what his concerns were, or where his weariness was lying, seemed to me to fall nicely in place with what I'm seeing Paul is doing in Ephesians 4. And I just wanted to bring out that the point at which something is changing and structures are disintegrating is going to be a place of trial and difficulty that is going to be uncomfortable. So it's like, a lot of us have expressed like the uncomfortability we've had with sort of this FSI format, where it's like, it doesn't feel like church. It doesn't feel like this thing. And I just wanted to say that I think that that's okay, because the pattern I see in Ephesians 4 is that it gets distributed out, and then it's within the individual that the doing is going to emanate out of. And I brought in Nietzsche for that because I see him sort of making a similar kind of argument throughout his work. So Ron's had his hand up.
Ron.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to see if I kind of, if I'm grasping essentially mostly what you were saying, Nick, but kind of also the idea here that basically, so what we're saying is like we're in basically verse 13 and beyond, and yet we're attending services in verse 11, and so that's why
exactly
we're kind
right.
of not
That's exactly
really
right.
feeling what it's not doesn't feel right there, right? Okay. I just wanted to make sure because that's what I got from it too. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, Ron, the
That was
word
awesome.
that stuck with me with what Nick was saying was responsibility, with emphasis on response ability. Like we have according to verse, where is that? 7, but unto every one of us is given grace according to the measure of the gift of Christ. We all have this, and it's this, are you expressing it? Because once you have this and you've got the safety wheels, you've got the law, you've got the black and white, just like we were saying, but there's a certain point where I think, especially what Kevin was saying, I think earlier, was like when you actually taste the real thing, not just the facsimile of the expression of what it really means to live this out in our church in the standard denominational or whatever kind of standard church service kind of thing, but you actually start experiencing church as the body, because the church is not a service or an event or a building or a nonprofit. It's the actual group of people. And when you start experiencing that expression happening for reals, then you're like, wait a second, I'm starting to grow up. And I think it scares a lot of people because they want to keep being children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness wherein they lie in wait to deceive. They would prefer it that way because then they don't have the responsibility to deal with the Mormon or the Jehovah's Witness that knocked on their door, right? Or the Calvinist friend or the Catholic cousin or the whatever, to know what they have to do about that. But I think for those of us who've started to experience the real thing and get in touch with the logos, as Kevin has said, then it's like okay, now if we aren't being responsible for ourselves to express those parts the way that God has put on our hearts to do it, then we start going nuts. And I have found that when I decided to be like, okay, what if I had to be the church in my house because we got locked in our homes from a tyrannical government or some, crazy disease or something going around, I'm sure no one is familiar with those things happening the last 2 years. Well, like, how could I still be the expression of the church in my own family? Right. And for the first time ever, I really took seriously my Bible reading. I really took seriously memorizing scripture. I really took seriously learning the guitar so I could start playing worship for my wife who needs musical worship. And I'm like, well, if I was the only one who could provide that for my wife, it's now my responsibility to learn how to be musical so I can do this with my wife. And that when I've been able to then live that out and play some music for her by the campfire and we're singing worship songs together, it's far and away better than almost any church service that I've ever attended.
So if you're playing for your wife, you might want to throw in some Chris Stapleton in there too, by the way. Maybe a little GNR.
Buble.
I mentioned game A and game B earlier, and that's terminology that probably got popularized with the intellectual dark web, but it goes back, I think, primarily to a guy named Jim Rutt, who's done a lot of work with the Santa Fe Institute back in 2011, 2013, and worked with Jordan Hall. And let me kind of give you a concept here of game A and game B so that you can see the transition. Game A is the standard way things are done in society as we know it, and the way information is transmitted is a one-to-many broadcast model. You have one pastor in a church, bunch of people sitting on pews. You have one teacher in the classroom, bunch of students doing the listening and the learning. You have Walter Cronkite and everybody else just watching him. There's no discussions, there's no conversation. It's all one-way transmission of propositional stuff. There's colleges coming up now where all the learning is peer learning, and you can decide what you want to learn. I was trying to have a conversation. There was a high school student I was talking to who wants to be a history professor. And I'm like, you don't want to be a history professor because in 20 years, there aren't going to be any history professors. Or I don't know how long it's going to be. So if the game A model is what Jordan Hall calls like the blue church, and then there's a red religion, because think of a religion as something that you can follow. I'm trying to use terms bespoke to this conversation. I'm not trying to use these terms dogmatically, like you have to take them out of this conversation. And a lot of people like Christianity is not a religion, it's a relationship. I know all that stuff, but just forget about all that for a minute. And you can be a follower of a religion in a communitas without being part of a structure, without being part of an institution. Because as soon as something becomes an institution, it has the perverse incentive of self-perpetuation rather than the incentive of the edification of the people that are members of it, which is what should happen. And it's like Paul and Jesus know this. Like we have to have verse 11, verse 12, we have to have an institution so far as we need to get things started, but we need to pre-plan so the institution won't continue to perpetuate itself. We need to pre-plan its demise on purpose and take it away so that the individuals can then start to mature and grow. So we have the maturity here. We have the growing here. And when I say maturity, what we really have is one of those dichotomies. You have naivety here. Children tossed to and fro is naivety. And when I say maturity, I'm like, you don't want to be that. And in order to not be naive child, you need to be mature. So you're going toward a perfect man with the stature of the fullness of Christ, which means you're going to have to grow. And in doing that, you're going to have to speak. So instead of this one-to-many broadcast model that's happening up here in verse 11, you have a many-to-many mesh network topology in verse 16, where if you are familiar with like Metcalfe's law and networking, everybody is a transmitter and receiver, and it is a many-to-many relationship or many one-to-many relationships where there is no facilitator or mediator of the group per se. Maybe a facilitator, like an overseer, pastor of a church, would ensure that this is happening, but he is not the only one doling out information that everybody else has to listen to. And so now the edification model shifts, and that edification model is what is in line with what I would say the values of game B are. And also game A, you have rivalrousness, and idea sets win because they're good at rivalry, not because they are true in a rivalrous landscape. And that's a very big problem. But when you move over to this kind of edification model, idea sets actually it shifts to where the landscape is more conducive to promoting idea sets that are true. And then the group is also anti-fragile. There are no more children tossed to and fro, so they're anti-fragile. You can throw error at them. You can fuzz test them. Fuzz testing is a word like when you're designing software. When you're designing software, you fuzz test something by throwing a whole bunch of random data into it to see if you can mess it up on purpose. What happens if I type letters into the phone number spot, that kind of thing. So then you move into this. If you're in a game B scenario, what they would call game B, and you're in a mesh network topology of edification, what that requires is that every individual participating bring a lot more to the table. So like Ben was saying a second ago, he found himself studying more, memorizing more, learning the guitar. He's bringing more to the table. Every individual who's participating in this now, you need to do your study. You need to have expertise in a couple of things. You need to take responsibility for the size of your vocabulary and your ability to understand things and your ability to articulate things, not so that you can prove that you can rank high within the in group, but so that you have something to bring to the table, and so that you don't inadvertently introduce pollution into the information ecology, which means you're going to have to be asking questions. And you also need the freedom and the emotional safety, psychological safety, to be able to say things poorly and badly, and so that the group can rehearse it out, hash it out and make it better. For example, what I just heard Ben say earlier, I understood it better after Nick talked about it, and then after Ben talked about it again, and then after Ron said something about it. I understand it better now. And it makes sense to me, and it sticks. It's sticking in my head. And without all of us doing some talking, that I don't think that set of ideas would have been manifested anywhere like that. And it took all of us working together to do it, and we all had to bring something to the table to make that happen. Stop it now. I'm gonna stop talking.
That sounded like a calling.
There you go. Yeah, that's a good calling. I guess you have to bring something to the table. What are you bringing to the table?
Could somebody summarize those 3 points again briefly?
We should have somebody else summarize them. I'm kidding.
No, you're right. Somebody else should.
I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I mean, Ben opened up the idea, and then Nick commented on it, and it makes a whole lot of sense to me.
I'm too smooth brained to be able to use information ecology the way Nick did, or Sophia, or whatever the other stuff was. I don't have enough folds in my brain to be able to regurgitate that.
No, I just end up confusing myself and everybody else, and then I need someone like Ron to come in and just save me. Save my thoughts. Joe, the 3 distinctions that the 3 movements I saw from Ben's anecdotal story, and how I see those movements actually converging with the movements Paul makes in Ephesians 4, is there's some sort of social structure that looks like a hierarchy with individuals at the top, and that's how the information distribution, or that's the information ecology structure. And then it disintegrates in verse 13 till the fullness, till we all come to the unity of the faith, fullness of stature of Christ. And that disintegrates, and there's an uncomfortable moment. There's a tossing, there's a to and fro. There's this, well, what happened? God is dead. Where's value? How do I make meaning? What's going on here? And then he gives you this new information ecology, a new edification model, which is distributed cognition. And then the third movement I see him making, and the third thing that I saw Ben bringing up, was that it really ultimately comes down to the response ability of the individual. And that's where I'm seeing in verses 20 through, I think, 22 or 24, that it's an addressing that it's like, listen, individuals, put off the former conversation, the old man, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, Romans 12, and put on the new man, who is made righteous. He knows how to cultivate meaning, of his own sort of existential justification by faith. He's not going to let, I heard somebody say, just as an example, and I don't mean to put anything political or anything like that. It's just a good example that stuck with me, is people were looking for justifications as to why they wouldn't get the COVID-19 vaccine. And that's a big deal where I am in Connecticut. It's very liberal, and there's a lot of restriction and enforcement of this vaccine here. And somebody gave a justification as to why they wouldn't get the vaccine. And it wasn't for biological reasons or scientific reasons or anything like that. It was just like straight up, I don't let other people determine what's relevant for me. That's it. And so that's somebody who has a lot of internal fortitude and a good, strong mechanism for meaning making, because they're not tossed to and fro with every wind of doctrine and putting off the former conversation, game A, and putting on the new man, which I don't know, I don't want to butcher the verse, but the new man as an individual, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness. So that was a really long summary. Sorry.
But did they do that with all lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing people who chose to get the vaccine? Because Ephesians 4:2. Because that person could just be a stubborn butthead, or they could be someone like you said, who is this developed, intelligent, free thinking, does that sort of thing. But I think that the character aspect of it there is the key too, right? Where it's like the character has to be there. Otherwise, because you can get a bunch of, dumb, ignorant people on any side of any political or medical or scientific issue, ignorant. But if it's with lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, they're actually super patient with people who disagree with them, then I'd be like, boom, they have it. They are not children anymore.
Right. It's the person who has just the most important thing for them is that they take responsibility. And they have taken the responsibility to say, no one is going to determine what's relevant for me.
So, yeah, what I hate about that example is that a lot of people are going to think that it's about the vaccines, and it's not. And that the whole issue too, it comes to, and I'm not like reprimanding you for using that example. It's just that some people in the comments and stuff will think they want to start arguing about that. But it's like the difference between being pro or anti-vaccine, or being skeptical of it, versus being pro or against the mandate, which is a completely different thing. And people try to corrupt the language by conflating the two. And honestly, I think that there's good points on all sides of things like that, but you have to be able to distinguish something like that, thoughts about because a mandate is requiring that everybody outsource their own agency to a third party. And regardless of what the issue is, that's a problem. That's a problem. Mandates are a problem. A lot of people say that.
Oh, I have a thought.
But I just want to add to this real quick, though, that when it comes to bringing something to the table, that a huge part of that is discernment. That everyone's going to be hearing novel things. So you are going to have to know how to respond to novel things without having a paradigm that does it for you, and without having an institution that does it for you. And you execute discernment, you exercise discernment. And if everybody's doing that, and you are increasing your ability to articulate the signal that you heard as you're separating the signal from the noise, and as everybody does this, it becomes this, compound self-replicating feedback loop, where the signal that's there gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and the noise gets eradicated more and more and more in this anti-fragile system. And I think we've even seen it here tonight, just with these little three things that we're bringing up that Ben started us off with. We've seen this thing refined. Joe. And then Ben's got something to say after Joe. Joe?
Sorry, I was muted. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah. So the responsibility of an individual in a group. I've heard that if you get a bunch of smart people together in a group, like a committee meeting, and they're really smart people, individuals, as a group, the average IQ immediately drops 15 points when
What?
that was a joke, but there may be something to it in this sense that in a group they may be reluctant to take a responsibility or to act, to say anything, because other people will criticize what they say, and so they're not putting forth intelligent comments that they could if they were not in a group. Maybe that's the factor.
Say that again, Joe. In other words, if they weren't in a group, they'd be able to articulate comments better.
If they were, a smaller group, maybe one-on-one, in some situations, maybe they're afraid of what other people will say.
Yeah, that's the real fear.
And yeah.
I mean, I'm honest. I'll be honest. I was straight up honest with you. If like this coming weekend, we're not having a little get together in Baton Rouge, but we were planning to. If we did, and I hope one day that we do, I will be able to say things to this group, whoever of this group shows up in person, that I will never say on YouTube. Because I'm afraid. Because I'm afraid of I don't know. I don't know what I'm afraid. Maybe that's a flaw.
Well,
But
it
at this
could be
current
wisdom.
level of growth that I'm at, that's where I am.
Yeah, well, it could be wisdom too,
Yeah, it could be that. I doubt that though.
Well,
Anyway.
Joe, one of the things I want to respond to what you just said, which is really profound, because I was raised by academics, so I know exactly what you're talking about. People who are way too intelligent but not very smart, kind of thing. Not that my parents aren't smart. I'm just saying that the crowd they hang out with is filled with a lot of intelligent dumb people, and
Educated beyond their intelligence.
far
I want to get to
beyond.
Ben after this. So I mean, the other Ben.
Oh, okay. I was going to
after
say.
this.
Well, you put me on the spot, so I was like, well, I got to say something now. You didn't say Quackenbush. You got to call me Reese and him Quackenbush or something. But
yeah, I forgot to distinguish.
Sorry, Ben, to cut in line. I'll just make this super quick.
No, go ahead.
I will say that the most growth I've had in terms of like having to actually double down and try to figure out what I believe and why I believe it was becoming friends with someone who absolutely is convinced you can lose your salvation, which I didn't hold that view at that time. And right now I'm not going to say what I believe. But I had to sit there and actually had to spend hours and hours and hours of research studying it, and a Hebrew roots person. And those were two things that if I had just been in my like, oh, I don't want to speak up, or if they had been in a situation where they didn't want to speak up, I would not have had that challenge to be like, wait a second, I think that's wrong, but I'm not sure. I'm going to come at this with a meekness because, hey, maybe I might be wrong. But it caused this huge growth spurt in terms of my desire to study God's word and pouring over texts and doing that study because I was presented with new information. That's all.
All right. Okay. Can you all hear me? Okay. All right. Always having mic and internet issues. So like, yeah, it's like there's a bunch of these, I guess, disorienting. I'm kind of imagining them like these meme or ideology vortexes, like they're just trying to suck people in.
Ideology, like the science of causality.
What do you mean by that?
I was clear. I was trying to hear what word you said. Did you say ideology?
Ideology,
like ideology.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, like a meme complex and all that. Like there's all these like vortexes of ideologies that always try to like suck people in, and get in, like, especially when there's like particularly like bad times in history, it seems like that this like intensifies. Like you have like the like during the time of Jesus, you have the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and then you have all these like zealot cults that are springing up and trying to throw out the Romans and get all their followers killed in the rebellion or whatever. And you have all these like corruptions of Christianity, like with the Nazis and even today with and Calvinism and all these things that like go on and like and one of the worst parts of that, consequences of that, is it often like segregates people into these like it like pulls people off into this vortex. Like if you're not into this vortex, you're like going like fast the other direction. Like it's and so you never really. But one of the bad consequences of that is that a lot of people are stuck in these groups, like the lose salvation crowd, and you never get to hear too much from like what they have to say or something because they're just sucked into this like echo chamber.
You
where
said you never get to hear what they have to say.
What they have to say about a certain thing, like what they on their own have seen and observed, because they're like sucked off into this like echo chamber of sorts, and like with what I guess Reese, the other Ben was just saying, like there are like oftentimes like points of view that we don't even really consider, and then someone that was not in groups like happens that you just interact with them once, and it's like, oh, I never considered that seriously before, and it's like really strange.
So let me give you an example of what I think you're saying here. Like, people do this with political ideology. There were when Trump was still the president. I hate to go political, but Nick already broke this wall. When Trump was president, there were all kinds of Democrats going public saying they would never submit to a mandate for any vaccine because it wasn't based on science, all this kind of stuff. Now that Biden's president, it's totally flipped. And it's like, the point isn't about the vaccines or Democrats or Republicans. The point is like, people have picked teams and they will root for the spokesman of their team no matter what they say. No matter what they say. And when it comes to the anti-Calvinism stuff that we do, what I found is that when people are against Calvinism, they will cheer on anybody who's against Calvinism without realizing that some of their arguments are not good. They're very bad, or they're emotional based or something like that.
I've seen that too. Yeah, that
people just pick teams.
Yeah, it's like red team, blue team, this kind of game instead of like seeking the truth.
Yeah, it's a team. It's a team. I'm on the OSAS team. I'm on the you can lose it team, and that's all they hear. If you're for losing your salvation, then they approve. Doesn't matter why. Doesn't matter what your reasoning is. Just as long as it could just be an emotional reason. It reminds me of the people, every once in a while you come across a sports fan that they, even though it's very clear that the guy with the ball stepped out of bounds, they will be happy if the ref doesn't see it and they get away with it rather than admit, yeah, he did step out of bounds. That wasn't, that kind of thing. Yeah. Anyway, I didn't mean to jump on you, but I couldn't hold back there. That's exactly what people are doing. They're on doctrinal teams. Mm-hmm. Like, I believe XYZ doctrine, and therefore everybody who is on that team, I will root for whatever they say without doing any kind of discernment on the who, what, when, where, why, and how of what they say, or how epistemically warranted it is. I'm on that team and I'm rooting for that, no matter what.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I don't feel like you're jumping all at that or anything. That's like a great re-articulation of what I just said.
I guess it goes back to what Ben was saying about eternal security. It would have been so much easier for him just to go to his church website and read what they said in the statement of faith and just said that to his friend. But if everybody took his attitude and read and studied for a zillion hours, can you imagine how sharp we would all be and how beautiful?
Yeah, and how humble we would be, because when you learn more, you also it cascades your how much you realize you need to be ignorant about, because you realize how much you don't know, how much information is not available to achieve the level of certainty you thought you should have had.
The first thing I found was a ton of reasons not to believe in eternal security. First thing was like, that's a terrible reason. That's a terrible reason. That's a terrible reason. But it's so, just like what Kevin was saying just now, it's so tempting to just jump on it and be like, yeah, because God wouldn't blah, 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 blah. And it's like, that's not a reason to believe that view. That's just like, it just stirs you up emotionally. And, I'm just looking back at, somebody pointed out in the YouTube chat, you're like, you're not exegeting Ephesians 4. And it's like, crap, they're right. But look, going back to Ephesians 4:1 and verse 2, right? If we ask, well, how do we walk worthy of the vocation wherewith ye are called? You do it with all lowliness, meekness, long suffering, and forbearing one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And so I met this person through this channel, like literally it's somebody who watches of Kevin's videos and was very kind. And so I'm like, okay, well, I want to be unified with this person because they clearly love Jesus. So why would I separate myself from them just because he and I may end up disagreeing on this issue? And then just try to come at it with, all right, I don't know about this issue. I haven't researched it as much as you. You explain to me your view. Right. And I'm just going to sit here and listen and ask clarifying questions. Right. And it's taken me 10 years to get to the place where I can do that and not be a complete butthead. I'll use that word. And it's constantly like, I have to fight, like what Nick was saying. It's that nature. You're trying to get past the nature, that old fleshly old man that would just rah, shish kebab and fight and use dirty tricks and do all that stuff and be like, no, my goal here is truth, not to be right. And
yes,
to try to do that.
Philia Sophia, not Philia Nikea.
Yes.
Love of wisdom, not love of victory.
Oh, okay. I was going to say in-group belonging says yes.
Look at it. Look and see if everybody else is nodding first, and then you can. Wow. I was talking with somebody on the phone just the other day about eternal security, and one of the things I was trying to convey to them, and they had like a tension approach to it. There's seems to be a tension between, there's like a lot of warnings, but then there's also a lot of assurance, and I could go through each passage and hash them out, but that wasn't the point. The point is kind of back to something else that the other Ben said. Ben Reese, you're now the other Ben. Just like the other Jared. And if y'all have ever seen Silicon Valley. So he talked about what you're doing, whether or not somebody believes in eternal security. If they can fellowship with me and we can help edify each other, and they're not holding things and as a litmus test or as in an unwarranted epistemically unwarranted way, and they're willing to help edify me and allow me to try to help edify them, both of us acting in love, if they're willing to do that, there is a certain degree to which I don't care what they believe about it. And that may come out wrong, but there's a certain degree to which I do not care. And on a few issues, and I'm not even going to say what they are, but on a few issues, there is a certain degree to which I don't care what the issue is. Things that I don't think that can be known, for example. There are some things. Go ahead.
Yeah. So like the thing that you're getting at, I think has emanated out of the line of what Ruth said, Ben said, and then other Ben said. And it's this thing that wisdom and being committed to speaking the truth in love always transcends morality. It always transcends the moral framework and the moral foundations theory that makes you tribally committed to a certain belief. And whenever you are actually committed to speaking the truth in love, it will always transcend that morality. It's beyond good and evil. It doesn't matter that, I believe in blue team, and so therefore these truths must be held and fortified against all opposition, no matter what. It transcends morality, and I've heard that in the background of everything that everybody has just said.
Yeah, one of the places where this and I guess I might say one of the things I never thought I would say in public, or at least on YouTube, but when it comes to the attributes of God, I enjoy thinking about those kinds of things in a variety of different ways. There's several different lenses that I put on. And I'll be honest, sometimes I put on the Calvinistic lens and I look through it. And I think that there might be some, I don't know, I think maybe every perspective has some kind of signal in it, or at least an inkling of it, that maybe they get the propositions all wrong, but there's something there that needs to be seen more clearly. So I enjoy putting these things on, and I don't feel like having a particular opinion about specific attributes of God is helpful in any particular way, because it kind of blinds you to what might further be revealed later. And in discussing things with Calvinists, I found out that I find that they actually worship the attributes of God rather than God. They worship the descriptions of God rather than God. And God's above that. God's above and beyond any way that we can describe him or his attributes. Somebody said, "You crazy Pelagian Arminians, you need to bow down and worship the sovereignty of God." That's what he said. Worship the sovereignty of God, not God, but God was the object of a prepositional phrase modifying sovereignty. They're worshiping sovereignty, not God. That's
I give an anecdotal example of that. That just happened to me. Like
yes,
a week ago or so. So you had brought up that a while ago I had kind of tried to provoke everybody to stop thinking of truth as in terms of matters of fact, or
right.
the matter of fact, and more as a value.
Right.
So I want to switch.
A lot of people are going to balk at that because they don't get what you're saying, but and you think it through and you come full circle. Yeah, you have to value correspondence with reality in order for truth to matter, with a capital T. Anyway, go ahead.
I want to switch up that provocation, and
Yeah,
I came to I've been chewing the cud on this for weeks, and it's so juicy. And the reason it's an anecdotal example is because it's like I'm chewing on an attribute of God. And what it is that a definition, and again, you can just listen to the definition and throw it in the trash, but that truth is that which loves being. And you can chew on that for a while, a long while. That truth, and you can even anthropomorphize it. Truth is that which loves being, capital B. And then you can put being as like existing, like when God says, "I am that I am."
God said, "They that love me hate death. They that hate me love death."
Right. So truth is that which loves being. So Jesus Christ on the cross is literally dying for the sake of life. That, and it just, I don't want to get too far off on it, but chew on that for a little while.
So when you make that statement, I've ruminated on the concept of being a lot over the last 3 years. So it immediately resonates with me, but it would not have a couple of years ago. So I will say that. Somebody said, I don't know if this is a joke or not. Let me get my prop. Somebody said, these people do not seem to have read Louis Sperry Chafer's 8-volume systematic theology. And So on this channel, let me put this little comment up there. It might be fun to see this little comment. One of our understandings of truth is that trying to capture it, this statement right here, trying to capture truth propositionally is one of the biggest violations of, it's one of the biggest sins that can be committed. It's one of the biggest violations of good heart law. So to have a systematic theology, it's, we know, like, here's my prop. We know what the systematic theologies say. We just also know that they're full of baloney. And to be focused on propositional statements and to think that those propositional statements can capture truth and should be regarded as dogmatic is not only disoriented, but it is delusional. It's absolutely delusional. And it's a failure to realize the role that words play in the bigger concept of knowing and of wisdom. But we always get new people listening to the channel who they think of Christianity as sets of propositional truth claims. They have reduced all the kinds of knowing down to the propositional knowing, to the exclusion of the other three kinds of knowing. And they would think that not referencing a systematic theology is due to ignorance of those propositional truth claims. No, it's due to not valuing them, not ignorance of them.
I comment on that too.
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Well,
I'm just going to hear from you tonight.
Well, I think I forget if it was, I think it was Ron that said it earlier. Like in reference to Ephesians 4:11, we're doing services, and if you've built a doctrine off of just that verse, or you just stop reading the chapter at verse 11,
right?
You have to kind of operate on that in that ecology. You have to respect that hierarchical position that someone like Francis Schaeffer is smarter than you, and he can exegete the Bible better than you because you're not that anointing or whatever you want to call it. So at least that there's a consistency in that. Unfortunately, there's like verse 4, there's 4:16 where we're all working together and they're missing that. They're really missing out on edifying.
I need to say something. So if people want a practical example of an answer to this question, what are we doing with this 3-step thing of what Paul's going through? When I was watching you I think it was either when you were talking with Wade or you were doing the Dragon Part 3, it was when you were with Wade, because there was a commenter that came in as a new person into the channel, like Josh was just talking about. And I remember he made a comment. He was asked if he was a Calvinist, and he was. And if you look in the live chat, if you watch the way that Josh responds to him, I think it is the epitome of what is going on in Ephesians 4.
By the way, I love that. Go ahead. I didn't hear you because I was talking like an idiot.
I thought the way Josh responded, like I was like jumping up and down on my couch watching that, because Josh didn't just like commit himself to the anti-Calvinist script of what he was going to say. He asked the dude genuine questions in a live chat.
Yeah.
And it felt to me while I was watching it on the couch that Josh was single-handedly going to pull this dude right out of Calvinism. Like I was literally
Josh's
thinking that to myself.
Were great in that.
Yeah. And that was solely because he was the Ephesians 4, speaking the truth in love, not being tossed up to and fro by every wind of doctrine, was just emanating out of a live chat on YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Thanks, Nick. I really appreciate that.
yeah, and I second his comments. After seeing your comments, I no longer felt the need to engage myself, which is great to see. A lot of times, like in the comment section on under YouTube videos, I'll see somebody wrote something and I'm about to go firing away, and then I'll see, oh, there's other replies. Oh, they got this. They got this in the bag.
Yeah, I
Do
don't
they-
even know how
it's-
you were multitasking. You're doing a live stream with the Waitster, and then you're on the live chat at the same time. I'm like, this is impossible. How is he doing this? It's like,
There's two of me.
I was thinking that. I was like,
There's a mirror beside me, and the other guy does a lot of the work.
the clone.
Yeah.
So really, really quick, I just wanted to circle back on a couple of things from tonight. I really like what Nick said about diversity and unity. And I feel like that's kind of like a next step when you talk about the sacred second self, when you're aiming at that transformation, you lose all the controversial, what's the word that you use, Kevin? Rivalrous dynamics.
Oh, yeah.
And I also feel like that kind of speaks to what Ben Reese was asking. It's like, well, how do I know what I'm called to do? And it's like, well, I feel like Paul's kind of addressing that in the spiritual sense, where he's laying the bedrock for how to become what we're aiming towards, and then those other things will kind of define themselves as you have your trajectory aimed on becoming more like Christ. So I really felt like all of that kind of tied together.
Yeah, I like that.
And I also really wonder, like, because I was looking back at Ephesians 2, and I was wondering what it was like for the Gentiles in that context. Like, how did they have similar things like the Jews with like prophetic, or were they looking at astrological things, or were they just kind of tossed to and fro with political dynamics, whatever the government's, whatever the culture is doing at that moment? Like, how is Paul going to be able to teach them through this transitionary kind of a time where they're being grafted into something that they were totally foreigners from? They were alienated from the covenants. And it's like, that's a big job that Paul's got.
I've been trying to think about the Greeks' response to Christianity with regard to 1 Corinthians 1, and with regard to the axial revolution, and with regard to the subduing of Greece by Rome, of the Grecian Empire by Rome, because the Grecians really had a good thing going. Socrates taught people how to talk to each other. Plato taught people how to strive to be something better. Aristotle taught people how to deal with facts. The Stoics taught people how to control their emotions. And you have an entire society of people who value these things, are put together well. There's something that they're still missing. Christ would tie all that stuff together and be able to give it some aim and some value. But to be taken over by the Romans would let you know that there's something that you're missing. Otherwise, you would have perpetuated yourself more successfully. And so to be in their situation, you can't exactly boast yourself of having all the answers, because history bears itself out. Who's the boss? The Romans are, not you. But it's an entirely Grecian society which paved the way for Christianity to be spread in an unprecedented way. And then you bring, here's Jesus Christ. That's the thing. That's the thing that's missing. That whole, the pattern of Jesus Christ and the person of Jesus Christ, the agape, the responsibility, concept of truth, the way, correspondence with reality. Yeah, I often wonder, to jump on what you were saying, what was going through a first century Greek's head as they're listening to Christianity, what they would think.
Yeah, Paul was in jail. I mean, are we all supposed to get arrested? You know, like
Yeah,
we all
yeah,
fall,
exactly.
you know,
It's
they don't
foolishness
know.
to them. Look, what do you got going? We have changed the world, the whole culture, the whole known world is Hellenized. What have you done? Well, we're about to inject that with a Trojan horse called Christianity. We're about to write a Bible in Greek and spread it on all the roads that you guys paved. You know, now you guys gave us a single language that we can write a Bible in and propagate it everywhere. So it's amazing how all that worked out. It is it's like almost 3 minutes to 9. We're a little over, and you guys have hung in there admirably. Are we ready for final comments? Anybody got any last thoughts that got to get out? By the way, I've really enjoyed this, and I've got, you know, somebody said you're not exegeting Ephesians 4. Well, the idea is to discuss it, and I feel like the concepts that have been catalyzed by looking at Romans 4 have been extremely edifying as far as I'm concerned. I have a lot to think about. All right, comments from you guys before we wrap it up for the evening.
Just going off of something that Nick said earlier. I'm not sure. I kind of forgot what it was, but I remember that there was a time when I was like kind of in this like stage where I was in this like internet bubble of, I guess you could call it, like people who were into, I don't know, I guess you would call it free grace theology.
Yeah.
Which is like basically which is like basically surrounds, it makes its identity off of opposing lordship salvation. And I don't consider myself a lordship salvationist, but I find it, but I was getting out of that, and I think this is what you're saying earlier, Nick, is that there's a lot of like moralizing, like sort of baggage that's used. It's just like if you think that, like if you talk about loving Christ or something like that, then that becomes like, then there's this like language of like, that's work salvation, not like the whole lordship thing where like you deny that there's carnal Christians on us, but like talking about like loving God or some, like there's like a lot of language that's like dangerous to use around like these people. It's like, again, there's a lot of moral baggage I had to get through in like kind of distancing myself from that movement now. And yeah, it's like really strange.
There's a guy that comments every once in a while about, he thinks that free grace theology would solve all the problems, and if we just teach everybody that, and that it doesn't matter. See, some people think that, okay, if this systematic theology is wrong, if I just replace all the wrong things with true things, then that systematic theology would be the truth. And if we just program everybody with it, with simulated thinking, then we would be an army to vanquish all the falsehood. It doesn't work that way. It's still trying to capture truth propositionally. And so free grace theology, even if all the propositions are true, it's still not, having a set of true propositions does not transform the individuals and edify the individuals into wise people. Well, that's the goal. The goal isn't to have a body of truths. The goal is to have wise, edified, transformed people. That's the goal. And you can't have transformed people if they have a high degree of certainty about propositional truths, because the wisdom gem occurs in uncertainty.
I always think of the Borg from Star Trek. Does anybody know what I'm talking about?
Absolutely.
And it doesn't matter if it's Calvinism or any other propositional in grouping. it's always a hive mind. Everyone's outsourcing their sense making and nobody's thinking for themselves.
Yeah, it's a botnet, children of the corn. Yeah.
I would even go stronger on that comment, Ben,
Zombies.
in noticing that there seems to be a lot of like moral currency going around. Like I would go stronger and just say that that's really all that's going around is just
moral currency. Yes.
Assertions, and they're disguised as ideology through proposition sets. And that ties
But you're
into
more moral if you think these propositions are true.
really, I think that that's all that's going on. And so what the wisdom gym offers is for you to get in Christ, walk in this land of grace where the wisdom of God transcends this. It goes beyond good and evil. It's not committed to this set of right and wrong. It goes back to the quote that Ruth said at the beginning of the session about ideology is like just a marketing ploy towards irrelevant things, right? So like I just love the saying that wisdom doesn't bow to rules. It will not bow to rules.
And that's the one rule. I have to throw that in there. I always say that one. What other comments do we have? By the way, I like that I've been saying that ever since I heard you say that. I don't know if you texted it or said it in one of these things, but I've been saying that to Paula every once in a while.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, Kevin.
Go ahead.
So I kind of zoned out when you guys were talking about Greek stuff, but then I kind of like snapped back in because it's been a long day, man. I'm also an IT project manager, been a lot of calls, but the thing that struck me about what you said about how we're going to take your language and we're going to like dominate the world, right? Well, what was so interesting was although Greek was a common language, there were still multiple different cultures, and Christianity is the only religion that's ever gone to different cultures and had an epicenter of its belief system in a different culture. And that's happened multiple times throughout world history, right? So it started in the Middle East, it moved to Europe. It actually moved to America in terms of its core. Now it's in China and Africa more than it is anywhere else in terms of the core.
By center of gravity.
Yeah, the center of gravity. So, but then I was thinking about like, wait a second, aren't denominations and things? So I looked up what is culture, and the definition according to DuckDuckGo is the arts, beliefs, customs, institutions, and other products of human work and thought considered as a unit, especially with regard to a particular time or social group. And I realized like everything that we're seeing in terms of these conflicts between ideas and politics and all the stuff it's a culture conflict, right? So what happened in Christianity where we were so acultural that Christianity could spread from culture to culture to culture to culture and exist within the culture and add to the culture and both add to the good things of the culture and transform the bad things and the evils of the culture, right? Where
you mean
now,
like salt? You mean like
salt and light,
right? But like Jesus said, it's your salt isn't worth. Literally, that's literally what he said. It's not worth it to be put with the manure. In Luke, if you look up that verse in Luke, he's literally talking about it. You can't put salt in the manure; it's so useless. It's not even worth blank. But I realized like maybe what our kind of constant goal has to be a constant acculturation. Right, a constant melting pot, that at no point in time do we stultify not just our ideas, but our culture and that goes from like the microcultures that we have in
we have
in Newton, Georgia.
We're talking about Christianity here, not Catholicism.
Yes, yeah, but that's the idea is like okay, you got Baton Rouge, you got Nick, you're up in Virginia or something, or North Carolina or something, and then Ruth's in Canada, and the culture that we need to have, like the Christianity we need to strip away everything that's culture from it. Because if we add culture to Christianity, then you create multiple cultures that then conflict with each other. right? It just that was just, it literally popped in my head. And it's like, what we need to strive for is this constant acculturation, which is the modification of the culture of a group or individual as a result of contact with a different culture. So it's like, in a sense, we can never allow ourselves to stop acculturating, because if we do, then anytime this new thing comes in, the person who doesn't believe in eternal security, or the person who's a Hebrew roots person or something like that, or the person who thinks that the modalism thing where Jesus and the Father are the same being, the same person, and they just switch, right? Then we can't engage with them because they're outside of our culture, and now they're the enemy, like what you guys have just been talking about just now. Sorry, just like the thought blew my mind at 10 o'clock, and I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, one of these guys said Christianity is not culture. It gives the new right life identity individually by personal decision. Well, that's a failure to understand the point here. Culture is not prescriptive. It is descriptive. It is impossible for any group of people who live together to not have a culture. A culture is the description of the definition you gave. It is not so it's impossible to not have. So if you think of the impact Christianity has on a culture in which it is embedded, then ideally you would want it, the game B version of it should have a very positive impact. I think Rick B wants to say something.
Yes, Kevin, I just wanted to say that in a sense, what you're saying is we need to be culture agnostic. We don't care what culture we're in. We just want to make sure that what we're doing is the way, following and being Christ.
I think Ben said acultural at first. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those are good comments. Any comments from anybody else before we wrap it up?
Yes. I'm sorry, guys. I'm gonna keep it rolling. No. I just had this thought about a week ago that the book of Acts, and I know we've been going through that a little bit, or at least Kevin has, could be looked at big grand scale as like a theme to look at it through, is how Christianity stole the culture or enculturated this out and emanated out as a culture, to Ben's point.
Or it was more like how it got de-Judaized so that it could acculturate everywhere else.
Right. Well, came out of the culture of, or emanated out of the culture of Judaism, and enculturated Greece, Asia Minor, Rome, up and all the way to America. But that's not in the book of Acts. I think
people might be getting hung up on the word culture. If you could imagine Christians perhaps as a mix between a nutrient and a stem cell at the same time. See, they're not already flavored. They have something and they can go into anything. That thought has not fully formed itself in my head. Now I want to start talking about like chicken. You can put chicken in a pasta or you can put it in a salad. But once it goes in one or the other, you can't bring it back out and put it in the other one. I mean, I guess you could, but you get what I'm saying. By itself, it's, yeah. Any other comments? Well, this has been great. I want to keep doing this. Maybe next week we can get to chapter 4, verse 2, or keep talking about verse 1, or wherever the conversation. The point isn't, this isn't like a traditional Bible study where we're systematically trying to go through verse by verse and exegete the passage. There's nothing wrong with doing that, and we can do that, but the interaction that we have generates insight, and we're trying to catalyze and provoke that and use the text of Scripture to do it. That's what we're getting at. All right, folks. I look forward to seeing you next week. Peace out, yeah?
Thanks.
See you next Wednesday.